What in the world would convince you to revisit Discovery's early seasons? I mean, who'd be arrogant enough to assume we'd be nostalgic for these early episodes, or indeed have seen them more than once, so we'd have the capacity to orientate ourselves in them based on a single scene? As Captain Picard once said, can you imagine that? Welcome to Critic's Log. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. In a week when Alex Kurtzman took to the internets to tell us that the benefit of serialisation was that there were no filler episodes in Star Trek anymore, what do we get? Without irony, a filler episode. Face the Strange was what you might call a digression. And if you're thinking, a digression already? Only 4 episodes into a 10 episode season, you shouldn't really be surprised, because as we've discussed many times on this show, and indeed on its on the blog that was its forerunner, Discovery never has enough plot to fill its seasons. So there's always little tangents, always little digressions. And in these meandering seasons, usually this manifests itself either as a lot of padding, scenes with characters, you know, with 1,000-yard stares, contemplating their life and their feelings and their relationships with one another. Or it might indeed be them talking about their relationships with one another. But just ever so often, you get a little story tangent, a little bubble, which is designed to take you away from the main plot, which there isn't quite enough, for an hour. And this episode, Face the Strange, was one of those. What was it about? It was about the crew being caught in a sort of time bubble. Not all the crew, just Mick and new First Officer Rayner. Rayner, you see, was busy telling Mick that actually he wasn't really a fan of all of this touchy-feely stuff. He didn't really go in for all of this sort of, let's all hug it out and talk it out kind of thing. We're Starfleet officers. We're supposed to be a disciplined military organisation. That's what gets the job done. And Mick was busy saying to him, no. You obviously haven't seen the previous seasons of this show. By hugging it out, by talking it out, by emoting, that's how we save the world time and time again. So the episode was set up to be a big repudiation of the kind of criticism that you get here, for example, that Discovery is all feeling and no brain. So in order to make this point, somewhat laboured point, the crew, Rayner and Mick, got caught in a kind of time trap, and that was set by Green Man and Gamer Girl, Lock and Mull, I think they're called, who, as you know or may remember, the bounty hunter people who aren't Book, who are trying to find the pieces of the cosmic key, the Progenitors cosmic puzzle, before the Discovery crew do. They're the Belloc to the Discovery crew's Indiana Jones, if you will. And frankly, even if you won't. But they're not. They don't play an honest game. They're dirty fighters, and so what they've done is they've tried to sabotage the Discovery this week by using a device called a time bug, which is literally like a robot insect that stalls time. And they use that bug to trap Mick and Rayner in a sort of temporal loop, which is weirdly spatial in nature. They're trapped in Mick's ready room, and the ship jumps to different periods in time, but they're always starting in Mick's ready room. Conveniently for them, Stamets, who we're told has a consciousness that transcends space-time because of his tardigrade DNA, is aware of all of this, and so can help them beat the time trap and return to the present. Because while they're trapped in the loop, the Discovery is sort of out of time in some way, sort of temporarily inert, leaving Gamer Girl and Green Man free to go and find the thing. I think, let's just imagine Mick and Rayner are in temporal stasis. Nobody else is. But time can't move on for the Discovery until they're free. Are you following any of this? So, well, it was a bit of fun, I suppose, for the writers. They got to revisit Discovery's past. It's a pity they had to use a literal gimmick. There's a lot of literal gimmicks in Discovery. Time bugs, time crystals. The writers of this show can't think of a sciencey and interesting way to make things like that happen. So they imbue objects with whatever properties they need in order to make the plot happen. Back in the day, in old Trek, do you remember Star Trek? Back in Star Trek, they used to do it by talking about anomalies, wakes, rifts, scientific phenomena, if you will. And we bought into it, didn't we? Because even though we didn't know any of the details, because we're not, pseudo-scientists or future scientists, we sort of bought into, this is what would happen in a future where scientific literacy has advanced considerably, 40-fold from our understanding today. But Discovery isn't written for people who are interested in the future. It's written for the kind of deadheads, nimrods who watch TV now, and consequently you have time bugs and time crystals and things of that nature. Can't wait for the episode where Tilly's time hairpin causes the crew all sorts of trouble. It's coming, trust me. So, this time jumping was really a sort of two-fingered salute to the audience, an attempt to teach Rayner that the Discovery's collegiate approach to problem solving was the right one, not his lone wolf philosophy. The Discovery is a ship full of sailors with big hearts and big feelings and no personality, and that pays dividends when you're trying to save the world. The formula didn't probably worked in previous seasons, and indeed it worked again here, because they did work together, and older Mick and young Mick met up and were able to reach some form of understanding. God, it was horrible seeing young Mick again, wasn't it? The mutineer, some would say criminal, war criminal, from the first season, because they were able to reach an agreement. The day was saved once again. Mick and Rayner were liberated from their time bubble, and they were able to get back on the job and resume the chase. And that actually gave us an interesting scene. We saw the future. A future in which Green Man and Gamer Girl had given the Progenitors tech to the Breen, and the Breen had used it to attack Federation HQ. Now, we didn't know the nature of the attack, but we saw its aftermath. We saw a sort of shattered Federation HQ with all these terribly badly designed, unimaginatively designed ships in pieces and these structures in bits and so on. And it brought us back to the questions from previous episodes about exactly what kind of technology it is that is being sought here in this season. If we go on the reasonable assumption that the Progenitors technology is a kind of space member that ejaculates material into primordial systems, then does it make sense that that the aftermath of its use should see, decimation in space, floating starships, all that sort of thing? That suggests a more sort of conventional Armageddon weapon, a kind of, a big bazooka kind of weapon. And although we are talking about a kind of big bazooka in our minds, we're not talking about that kind of weapon, are we? We're talking about something that was made for benign purposes, like the Genesis device, that's been perverted into a weapon. But whereas that brilliant Genesis demo told us everything we need to know about how the Genesis device worked and what its destructive potential was, framed through the prism, of course, of it doing what it was supposed to do, which is terraform dead planets. We've had no such primer here, have we? We've had no such demonstration of what progenitor technology could do, what it is, what it looks like even. The Discovery writers are hung up on the cosmic key in its many elements, but they haven't actually bothered to tell us, have they, what it is we're looking for. And because we don't know what we're looking for, it's all a bit wishy-washy and opaque, isn't it? In Raiders of the Lost Ark, we had the exposition scene in the hall with the blackboard and the book that told us, what the initial MacGuffin was, the Staff of Ra, but also what the Ark was. And it gave us a hint about what the Ark might be able to do by way of illustration. The Hebrew is like this. So we got a sense of it. We understood that it was powerful and dangerous. And with Genesis, we understood why it was powerful and potentially dangerous. But we still don't know really what the Progenitors tech does here. We don't have any idea. Sorry to labour the point, but I think it's rather important. So, the culmination of this episode, they defeated the time bug and went back to the present, and Rayner accepted that Mick had been right all along, and that actually they were one big happy family, and that's how you win the day, by working together. But as I said at the top of this episode, I still think that this conceit is built on an extraordinary piece of arrogance. Why would you assume that anyone would give enough of a shit about Discovery's first 2 seasons to make these focal points for your episode? Now, normally in past Treks, going into the past was a bit of fun because the audience could be expected to know the early episodes well enough to instantly recognise where they were and what time period it was. In All Good Things, we go back to a time just before Encounter at Farpoint, and those scenes are fun, aren't they? Because we remember Data when he was still childlike and incredibly naive and so on. So him being hopeless, it's interesting. We see Tasha Yar, and that's got a lot of pathos because we know what's going to happen to her subsequently and all the rest of it. It's fun to see, the first season in all of its all its embryonic ideas laid bare, if you like. But every person who tuned into All Good Things knew Encounter at Farpoint like the back of their hand. It was such a famous piece of television that it was, you knew bits about it by cultural osmosis. Even if you're part of the know little about a lot brigade, you still kind of knew stuff about it, didn't you? I submit that no one but you and I have seen the early seasons of Star Trek Discovery. Nobody knows the scenes that have been referenced here. They don't remember these episodes. And indeed, Mick has to remind us about most of the details because we've forgotten them. So that's a flaw in the episode, isn't it? Because it robs those scenes of any real meaning. Oh, they're just in the past and something's happening and there's a battle going on in the background and a thing is happening and Mick's a criminal? What? That doesn't make any sense. How would a former mutineer become a starship captain in the future? Imagine if you'd only been watching Discovery since season 3. But then this is a show that took, 40 episodes to find its format. No one wants to be reminded of that, do they? There was a scene in this episode that kind of hinted at what it might have been. Mick briefly went back to her quarters and there was Book from a time before they'd broken up. And there was a little, little scene of longing where Book wanted Mick to stay for a bit of rumpy-pumpy and Mick didn't have time, of course, because she had to go and save the day. But there was a bit of longing there, and if you like those characters, I don't, but if you do, then there's a little bit of pathos in that scene. And that might have been how the story could have worked. Having little scenes like that, little character scenes, in which there is a little bit of pathos, a little bit of dramatic irony, because of our knowledge of those characters. If only we knew them well enough for any scene like that to have any real impact. Wouldn't that be incredible? On a previous Trek show, we would have done, but not on this one. Not on any new Trek. What a shame. And on that note, anomalous readings. One of the problems in this season of Discovery are the lack of good antagonists. So, Gamer Girl and Green Man, Locke and Mole are set up to be the Belloc to Micks Indiana Jones, but who are they really? They're just sort of generic villains. They poison a bloke at the start of this episode. They don't really have... They're just there to sort of exchange villainous cliches and be a pain in the Discovery crew's backside. Will they develop in subsequent episodes? Well, there's only 6 episodes of the whole series left. And they're background characters, really. It would have been nice if they could have been developed in parallel so that we actually cared about them, and even indeed maybe, could in part empathise with why they wanted progenitor tech. Why they were prepared to sell it to the highest bidder. But that character grounding has not been done, and it probably won't be done. The worst line of the episode belonged to Rayner. He said, "Spare me the I get you bullshit." Discovery writers, I know it's all over now and you've already moved on to other things, but for future reference, if you ever invited to write Star Trek again, which you won't be, put a red pencil through anything like that. There shouldn't be any swearing in the future. We've discussed it at great length in the past, but they don't swear in the 23rd century, let alone the 32nd. We discovered that the Discovery was built in dry dock in San Francisco. Another bit of Kurtzman era crap here. Starships are built in space, in places like Utopia Planitia, and not on Earth, not in dry docks. What next? We'll discover that they're building starships in Glasgow again. Thought we'd revitalise the shipbuilding industry. Starships are built in space. At least they are in Star Trek. Not in New Trek, of course. That is a throwback to the awful 2009 movie. We saw a glorious future in which all the crew were dead. Why couldn't the episode and indeed the series have just ended there? Mick encountered her younger self, and Mick's younger self was awful, a real prick. Just as she was in the first season proper. And that was a reminder to us, wasn't it? That the whole problem with Discovery is that it started off really badly by introducing us to a character we didn't like in circumstances that made us intensely unsympathetic toward that character. And then around that character is built a set of secondary characters whom we don't really like or trust either. And that's been the flaw in the design, hasn't it? Since day one. It was nice to be reminded of why this show never took off in our heads or our hearts. The fight between young Mick and older Mick was great fun, but in my head I thought, with modern visual effects, of course, it all looks reasonably seamless, but what I really wanted was for elder Burnham to be fighting a younger Burnham, but the younger Burnham to be like a 6'2" man with a wig who's only filmed in long shot. I miss that on Star Trek. I miss the era of the stunt double who doesn't look anything like the actor they're portraying. Couldn't we have had that and a sort of that would have been a nice nostalgic touch, wouldn't it? There was a sort of a joke, although I doubt the writers intended it in this episode, that young Mick, who cocked up everything, most notably relations with the Klingons, almost did it again here, almost sabotaged future Mick's efforts to save the Discovery and therefore save the Federation. It was a very close run thing. She was, in the end, talked down by Rayner. But, yeah, true to form, she nearly ruined everything. She's consistent in every time stream. So, that was Star Trek Discovery this week. It will return next week, so must we. Gird yourself and have a reasonably calm interim period. I'll be seeing you.